We're discussing supply chain innovation, transformation, and sustainability with Jon Chorley of Oracle and Tony Nash of Complete Intelligence. Jon, tell us about your role at Oracle.
Well, I run the supply chain management strategy group at Oracle, responsible for our overall investment priorities and directions for our supply chain solutions. I also have the Chief Sustainability Officer role at Oracle, where I help coordinate all of our sustainability policies and practices for the Oracle Corporation and help drive some of those ideas and thoughts into the products and services we deliver to the market.
And Tony Nash, tell us about the focus of your work.
Complete Intelligence, we're an globally integrated and fully automated artificial intelligence platform for cost and revenue planning. So we do forecasting for enterprises and for markets for things like continuous cost budgeting, continuous revenue budgeting, automation of certain, say, forecasting tasks. We measure our error rates. So that's really important as someone's planning, especially around supply chain. So we're trying to help people reduce the risks around their future costs. Supply chains are very complex: time, cost, quality, all sorts of considerations. So our focus really is on the cost element of it. And there's a lot of other things. And why we're working with Oracle, they have so many other things to bring to the table that we really try to complement them on that side.
And you met Jon through the Oracle Startup Program. Just briefly tell us about that.
Oracle for Startups program it's a fantastic way for early stage companies to integrate with the Oracle ecosystem. So there's the Oracle technology product side of it, but there's also the side of meeting people like Jon and meeting people like his colleagues and, the Oracle marketing team and Salesforce and product teams. Really amazing opportunities to understand how an organization like Oracle works and how a company like Complete Intelligence can really come alongside them and really enhance Oracle's end customer experience for the better.
Jon, during the last year, supply chain became a household topic for pretty much everyone. Yeah. What did the last year tell us about the nature and the reality of supply chains?
Well, that they're central to everything that makes the modern world, really. I mean, I think that when you see an empty shelf and then you realize that the reason it's empty is because of some issue with supply chain, or you see some run on a product or some shortage or some challenge in some way, people now understand that the complicated infrastructure that brings those products to them is really the supply chain. And obviously, as we've gotten into the more recent months where we're looking at the distribution of the vaccine, people understand that, yes, it's a technical problem to produce the vaccine, but it's also a supply chain problem to get it in people's arms. So all of those things, I think, have helped take the supply chain from the back office, from the folks like Tony and I who work in it day to day, into the boardroom, which I think is very important, but also into the dining room. People really now understand the importance and centrality to efficient supply chains.
Jon, so give us some insight into the kinds of weaknesses that this last year exposed in how we handle supply chains.
Well, I think that a couple of areas there that I'd point out. One is obviously we had a very uncharacteristic demand shock. So there was a real change in short-term demand. Some of that was upside. A lot of charcoal sold to power the grill. A lot of toilet paper. Some of it was obviously downside. Restaurants challenged, hospitality, and so on. So those demand shocks forced people to look at different ways to look at their traditional forecasts. So that is, supportable by the kind of technology Tony and I can help deliver, but it does require people to look carefully at how they're forecasting their demand. So that's definitely one angle. Another angle I would say is the overall concern about resiliency. A lot of folks had looked at ways of single sourcing, for example, maybe relying on goods out of Western China, for example. All of those things had a lot of challenges, and that forced people to look at, was a single sourcing strategy driven by cost only the right answer, or did they need to look at maybe simplifying their product lines a little bit so they had more flexibility, and looking at alternate sources of supply? So I think resiliency came a lot more to the fore.
We've had even companies like semiconductor companies who've been based in Asia start to build facilities in the US so that they can regionalize some of those supply chains and de-risk the downturn impacts of future shocks like this. So electronics manufacturers, other people who are assembling goods, or even some primary goods, are regionalizing their supply chains so that they don't see huge impacts for any sort of future issues like COVID or other shocks. So there's at least a little bit of a buffer by region, which obviously saves, it's greener in terms of, saving on the sea freight fuel, that sort of thing. But it's also helps cushion any shocks on the supply side so consumers can get what they need when they need it.
Jon, I've heard you talk in the past about the inherent challenge of manufacturing goods overseas, in China, for example, and the timeliness of getting them here in the US.
It obviously has a lot of advantages in terms of, cost, scale, and so on. But it does bake into your supply chain a certain fixed amount of time. And that, is fine if you have predictable demand. But if you have variable demand, it becomes a lot more tricky to manage. Mm-hmm. The same is true, really, of the innovation cycles. The speed with which you may want to innovate can be constrained by working those things from points of consumption, let's say Europe, North America, and points of production, let's say the East, China, Vietnam, and so on. So those are factors folks are considering, and I think in some areas, certainly advances in things like automation. And technologies like 3D printing, rapid prototyping, those things are changing the equation a little bit in terms of what constitutes the most cost-effective or the most efficient or the most responsive approach to manufacturing. And I think you're going to see, those factors gradually have more and more of a play as people develop new ways to balance those equations.
Michael, that's really interesting, because as we look at how the history of supply chains have evolved from, keeping, say, POs on 3x5 note cards 30 years ago to the digitization of that, it really started with EDI, electronic data interchange, from, say, the ocean lines and the air freight firms, so that you knew where your package was, all the way down to today, where you have everything kept, let's say, in a bill of material within an ERP system or a supply chain system. And what people have been doing, say, for the past few years is really bill of material versioning, where you're running scenarios on the same, say, product configuration or bill of material for multiple locations to understand where they should make a certain good, right? And so those considerations are allowing people flexibility. They can make the time and cost trade-offs to look at when they can have goods in a market, whether it's seasonality or whether it's some sort of disruption or whether it's some sort of, say, demand pop for some reason people may not know, right? But allowing people to run multiple bills of material or versions of bills of material allows them the flexibility to identify what they should produce where and what it should be made of.
Sounds like this is a data and analytics problem.
It is. And the way things have been done typically is, as a manufacturer, you sign a longer term agreement for your raw materials with a vendor. They provide that for you to a certain point. You make it in factory A in somewhere and then ship it out. Of course, there's not necessarily a single factory for any large company, but it's a well-worn path. But we've had kind of a atomization, I guess, of that with mini manufacturer, regional manufacturing, really flexible manufacturing, so that people can have localized versions, or, like I said, seasonality, these sorts of things. You can only make those types of decisions with data and with automation.
So you need clarity around the goals and the strategy. You need the right kinds of data. And then you need the cultural willingness to innovate and do things differently. Is that an accurate way of summarizing?
I definitely agree. I think, you need to have some idea of where you're going, although that probably is going to change, but you need to have that idea. You need to have the information, as Tony's discussed, that helps you, navigate that path. And then you need to be able to course correct because, we live in the real world and nothing quite goes the way you expect it to. And so you need to be able to constantly course correct. Like I say, you have a great set of headlights. You can see what's coming. You're coming to a cliff. If you have no brakes and no steering wheel, it's a huge problem. You'd rather not know. So the ability to course correct is like having brakes and a steering wheel. You need to be able to make those adjustments as things change around you. And that means, flexible systems, flexible processes, willingness to look at new ways of doing things, cultural changes, all of those things become important.
Tony, I have to imagine you spend a lot of time thinking about the sources of data as well as the machine learning models and other types of models that you create.
I get excited about things like data governance, but most people don't. But I get excited about it because I understand that it helps to have much better tools to make those decisions. And so, yes, we're thinking about the granularity, the frequency, the level of detail people have, and are they in fact using the data that they have to make decisions today? Because it's not just, let's say, a cultural change of let's rely on automation of things like forward-looking views or forecasting or planning. It could also be a cultural change of, are we looking at our own data to make our decisions? How much of our own data are we looking at? Are we looking at, maybe the error rates of the way we plan? Are we, looking back on that from time to time? Although that may seem really mundane and really small, it's actually very big for things like digital transformation, because you have to take inventory of what you're doing today so you can plan where you're going tomorrow. And like Jon said, it's never going to go exactly to plan. Never. I wish it would, but it never does. And so you have to really understand yourself well today so that you can identify what's possible.
Jon, we've been talking about the complexities of supply chain. Let's shift gears slightly and talk about the complexities of sustainability. And how does sustainability intersect supply chain?
Most people would agree that supply chains are about making and moving physical goods around the world, and that obviously is a huge part of what's impacting the environment, and it's a huge impact on sustainability. And the way we design those supply chains historically has been what I would call a linear supply chain, which is we make a product, we sell a product, we forget the product. We then make another product, sell that product, and forget that product. It's a fire and forget mentality, if you like, to some degree. Obviously, if we want to be sustainable, we need to think about the full life cycle of those products and how they get recycled back into the forward supply chain. So, I think as we progress into the future and we start thinking about these things more, and we're required to by the market, by regulations potentially, and by what constitutes good business, we will increasingly move towards adjusting our supply chains to be what we call more circular. That is looking at the full life cycle of the product. That begins with how you design it, but that's going to be a fundamental change in the way we think about all supply chains.
As we finish up, Tony, can you offer advice to business leaders who are listening to this who say, yes, we want to transform our supply chain, but where do we even begin? It's such a daunting challenge.
I would say really start with the easy stuff, get some successes, do a pilot, and then you can accelerate it very quickly. Data scales very quickly. The technology scales very quickly, but your team may be uncomfortable with digital transformation, especially around supply chains. So help them see some quick wins and then just push forward as quickly as possible after that.
Jon, you discussed earlier the cultural dimensions of supply chain transformation. It's really important. So just share some further thoughts on that and advice that you have for folks who are listening.
I think any change is at least as much cultural as it is technological. And the people who implement those changes are key to its success. And I think part of what's needed is a willingness to understand that, the way you did things in the past may not be the way you need to do things in the future. Mm-hmm. Quite often companies, for example, feel that they have a certain special way of doing a process, and that's absolutely required. And they hold on to that, even though there is really no business differentiation for them to do it that way. And they'll invest a lot of time and energy to duplicate that on a new platform. And we always encourage people to step back a little bit and leave behind some of those preconceptions. Not everything is your secret sauce. Your secret sauce is a little bit on the top. It's not stuff on the bottom. So leave behind those preconceptions. I think that's probably the single biggest cultural shift. And then the other point we mentioned earlier is board support. I think that's top down and having that sort of support from the upper levels of a business is critical to any large scale transformation. And I think the great thing, if there is a great thing from 2020, is that boards are aware now of the criticality of supply chains in their business and are probably more open to those kind of conversations, those difficult conversations from supply chain professionals with their board. So now's the time. The folks that make the investments now are the folks that are going to benefit from the uptick that we all hope is coming.
Jon Chorley and Tony Nash, thank you both for sharing your expertise with us today.
All right. Thank you so much. Great talking with you all.